Hey, we should be live again. Back. This isn't one of my practice on editing things. I did take a break before. But we're back now. Yes, thank you, Chocobo. Glad you're paying attention. Alright. So, we cut all these cards last time and I did not clear off the list. So, we have a very serious consideration right now, and that is, do I even want the Hardened Scales effects in this deck? The argument to be made in favor of them is that they allow for a more explosive start to the deck. If you go Hardened Scales into Mana Dork that cares about power into Tyvar, the amount of extra mana you will be able to generate is significant. In the mid to late game, though, generating extra mana for the most part is not helpful. One of the biggest things that would be helpful is the things that allow the creature to come in with counters, getting extra counters. So Tribute to the World Tree, for example, or um, the Devour creature, like Bloodspore Thrynax, I believe it's called. If the creatures are coming in with extra counters, it's a lot easier to do infinite shenanigans with Cloudstone Curio and haste effects. So that is a consideration for the deck. But I'm wondering if we don't bother with most of the gets an extra +1/+1 counter effects, since we're already getting potentially so many from Tyvar. It only really matters for like the first or second activation, because that gets the ball rolling that much faster, but it's not actually a thing the deck desperately needs otherwise. Like, maybe we keep the actual Hardened Scales, Doubling Season, and possibly Tribute to the World Tree because of its interactions with the other things, but... And we keep the Kami, obviously, because the Kami was already on theme before this. But the other things that add counters to our creatures, let's see what we have. They do help a lot with Mindless Automaton. If we start cutting too many of the the extra counters cards, then we can cut the Mindless Automaton because it's no longer functioning in the deck. We can cut Phyrexian Arena. We do have enough green-based card draw that we don't need a double black enchantment. So we can cut that while we're going through. Symbiote, Tooth and Nail, Joiner, Wit. Word, Cloudstone. Like I said, if we're keeping any of them, Doubling Season probably stays in. So does Vorinclex. Every time I see this Magus, I think we're going to wind up cutting it. So I think I'm just going to take advantage of that now. While I'm noticing it. 1,000-Year Elixir, Guiltleaf Archdruid, Mana Reflection. We already cut Seaton, didn't we? Because I have not seen him. I did not notice him the last time, and I thought I just glossed over him. But we actually cut him, right? We have Kamal here in Onslaught. There's nothing from Odyssey, Legions, and Scourge, and he is not there. And I'm pretty sure he was either Odyssey or Onslaught. He was like one of the larger parts of the block. So, yeah. But we haven't cut Sachi yet. We can probably go ahead and do that. Like, if we cut Seaton, Sachi's not doing much better. And we have fewer shamans. So that's another mark against her. She does let the shamans tap for the mana rather than her getting the counters by tapping the shamans for mana, but we have so few shamans relative to the creature count in the deck. Can probably just go ahead and cut her also. Yeah, I saw the Guiltleaf Archdruid. I'm like, I have not seen Seaton since we started doing this. Also, we went over this before, but almost none of my permanents are black. So Bloom Tender is going to tap for 1 mana most of the time. So we're just going to go ahead and cut that one also. Omnath, maybe. Still a possibility. Jiraga Tree Speaker. Sanguinade, Azuri, Ooze. So Champion of Lambalt might go, because she won't be getting as many counters. Because she doesn't tap for mana, and nothing is going to give her the ability to do so. Nor do I particularly want to. Like, that seems like such a narrow thing to care about with her. So the original Hardened Scales gives my creatures extra 1/1 counters specifically. There aren't that many. We cut like the Gift of the Family or whatever that would put other counters on it, but it does not work with like any of the other counters on any of our other card types, which is a very minor thing since +1/+1 counters are the biggest thing that we care about. So, for example, like cards like the Judge, our creatures naturally get counters anyway by tapping for mana with Tyvar or their own abilities, so we don't necessarily need to add extra counters. Also, if you're not adding a counter to begin with, nothing, like all of the Hardened Scales effects don't do anything for that creature anyway. We have to be adding a counter in the first place. Winding Constrictor is specific, like, is less specific, so any counters I add get an additional one. We only have the Woodfall Primus as our negative counter that we could be adding to our creatures. But it does double up on opponents' effects that put negative counters on my creatures. So we could theoretically cut Winding Constrictor at that point. It is another cheap creature that can get the ball rolling, but we have Hardened Scales, maybe the Ozolith. I think we can cut the Winding Constrictor, which then cuts another black permanent, so that makes the Bloom Tender even worse. Harwin stays, Assassin's Trophy, Beast Whisperer, Guardian Project, Druid, Bonus, Nisa. Great Henge adds an additional counter when it comes in, but it also lets me draw a card and taps for green and gives me life in addition to all the other things. So I think Great Henge stays. The original Ozolith as opposed to the Shattered Spire. This is one of those cards that part of me wants to keep it because every time my creature leaves play, not dies, so if it gets bounced, if it gets exiled, all of its counters move on to the Ozolith. Then the next combat of my turn, I can put all of those counters onto a different creature. So if I have another Power Matters taps for mana creature after losing the first one, I can just immediately get it back to that point and get the ball rolling that way again. So it is a way to protect myself from removal on my creatures that take time to build up. I don't know if that's good enough to merit a deck slot, is the problem. Like, we've got to make a whole lot of cuts to this deck to get it down to the 60 cards. So there's a very real chance that the Ozolith will go. Vorinclex will stay. Literally doubling the counters, I think, is too strong to not consider it. So he will stay for right now. Alright. Jugen defends the temple. So, assuming that Jugen lives long enough to flip into the dragon spirit version of himself. And that doesn't just get immediately annihilated by something. We get to put a ton of counters on the first creature that we cast after the ability resolves. Right? Or no, is it comes into play? Whenever another creature ETBs, I can pay X. So technically, I can cast the creature, but if somebody has removal, they can kill Jugen there. And the creature will come into play, and I won't get to add the extra counters to it. I think Jugen Defends the Temple can stay for now. So, again, a lot of the things that I'm cutting require that counters be going on our creatures anyway to do their thing. So, this doesn't require an external source putting counters on my creatures. This just gives them the counters and can give a large number at once and is a payoff mana sink at that point for the deck. So if I have a ton of mana to work with, putting, 10 or 12 counters on a Lowmore Elf makes the Lowmore Elf into an actual threat that needs to be dealt with. And again, we run the risk of I played Jugen, so that's a creature. The human monk that it made is a creature, and now the elf I've cast is a creature. So, and I'm assuming that I have one of the taps to add 5+ mana creatures in play already in order to have generated this much mana when casting a Lowmore Elf. So that is a thing. Like, we are already asking to be Wrath, basically. Like, it's still not bad, because if they have a Wrath, they need to cast it anyway because of Jugen. Like, it's making all my stuff threatening. And allow more Elf all by itself post Wrath is not doing much of anything. Like, we already got to the part where we could cast, like, allow more Elf and dump 12 mana into Jugen in order to make our allow more Elf a 13/13. So, if we're already at that point, the Lowmore Elf post Wrath is probably not super relevant. Like, that's not the card that we care got Wrathed away, except for the fact that we made it a 13/13. So, I think I am okay with leaving Jugen in for now. We might still cut him on the grounds that he's not doing enough by himself. He needs other cards with him. And there is a certain value in only needing like one or two cards to have the deck be functioning properly. I'm going to keep coming back to this. Like, Wraths are the most common mass removal in Commander. Being able to kill all creatures is the most common kill all of a permanent type you run into. And our deck is especially vulnerable to that. So, and we only have so many cards that will actually get us out from underneath that. We are running, like, basically all of them that fit our color scheme. So, it's not unreasonable for us to survive a Wrath at least once and force the opponents to have a second one. But at the same time, that's the best we're going to be able to do, is survive the one Wrath or get our anti-Wrath card countered on top of getting Wrath. Something along those lines. Like, make the opponent have a second card to force through the Wrath in order to kill our stuff. And we have a couple ways to buy back large portions of our graveyard. So we have things going on that will stop us from getting ruined by one single Wrath, but This deck is way more vulnerable to that, I feel like, than most of the decks I build. Because it's so creature reliant. Alright, so Jugen can stay for right now. Kodama can stay for right now. We have enough effects that put the first counter on the creature that giving them trample and the ability to fetch us a land every time they deal damage to a player is too good to just not run the Kodama, I feel like. Until we're down to like 5 or 10 cards we need to cut, then like almost everything is on the table. I can see Awaken the Woods being a cut, but it's also a card that by itself can get us back after a Wrath. Like, if they kill our whole board and we have 6 mana now because all of our mana dorks are dead, making 4 1/1s and then next turn casting Tyvar and turning all those 1/1s into 2/2s is probably enough to start building us back. That unless somebody else has built out a significant board and we get Wrathed again, we're actually like in an okay spot. Plus all of those creatures, we went from, 6 mana to 10 mana, and our creatures are growing, so, it made it easy to cast Tyvar again after the Wrath. So, I think we can keep Awakened for a while. Jubilant Brawler gives our creatures haste for their abilities only, so that's going to stay for right now. So, out of the cheap effects that give our creatures counters, or increase their counters, rather, Hardened Scales is the cheapest, but Ozolith is itself a way to put counters on the creatures to get its own thing rolling in the first place. So, it's literally becomes put 2 counters on that creature because of its own replacement effect. So, I feel like that one. In fact, out of all of the cheap ones, I think the Ozolith is probably even better than Hardened Scales in this deck. Because it gives us the extra counter and is a source of counters on top of that. And putting 2 counters on any of our mana dorks that tap for mana means that the effect is functionally free. Like we're spending green and 1 and we're adding an additional 2 mana. And that's going to be either green or the color of our choice, depending on which one of the creatures we're using it on. So yeah, I think the Ozolith stays. In fact, I think we cut Hardened Scales before we cut the Ozolith. Um, Tribute is another one that kickstarts the thing, and I went over this in the last one, but if we're doing infinite shenanigans with Cloudstone Curio, Tribute to the World Tree allows most, if not all, of the creatures with the ability to tap for mana based on their power. Like, most of them cost 3 and would tap for 3 if they had the 2 counters on it that this thing gives them. So it gives us more creatures that can come into play, tap for mana equal to their casting cost, and then they're coming into play, bounce one of our other creatures, so we recast that creature, bounce that one back to our hand, and then we just need any of the draw a card when a creature comes into play, or when we cast a creature, or to have a glimpse of nature effect still floating. So, I think Tribute can stay for right now. Tyvar is our commander. I'd probably want to keep him. Here's the next one for the counters matter. Woodland Bellower, Leyline of Abundance, Visionary. Yeah, I think Pure can go. He's 3 mana, and He adds one additional counter. He's very similar to the Winding Constrictor, except that he's one more mana on top of that. So if we're cutting Winding Constrictor, I think we cut Pier also. Alright, so the Thrynax helps get the ball rolling by adding more counters to the creatures as they come into play. But he needs an external source to get a counter, or he needs to eat one of my creatures. And aside from like Tyvar, like his original Planeswalker card, we're not making a ton of creatures. We have like the monk off of Jugan defends the temple, and Freylee's ability to make Lalamore elves. Then the only other creatures this thing can reasonably eat are Lalamore elf variants. So I think, yeah, I think the sprouting Thrynax, the Bloodspore Thrynax, can go. Like, in order to put counters on it, we need like the Ozoleth, or it needs to come in with the counters because of Tribute to the World Tree, or the Great Henge. And I think that's putting too much pressure on the deck's ability to generate +1/+1 counters, because otherwise he has to eat something, and we don't have a ton of cards that we can just let this thing eat, where it's not bad for us that it's eating one of our creatures. Like, there are plenty of decks I've built where killing off one of its own creatures for extra value is an easy thing to do. This is not one of those decks. All the creatures that we have in here, we want to have be alive, and I'm already at the point where extra creatures are a liability because we might get the board raft and lose all of the things we've built out. So having this thing have eaten another creature already on top of that is just another dead card that we lost to the Wrath effect, and I don't want to be that vulnerable in a deck that's already that vulnerable. Like, I don't want to exacerbate our weaknesses. So, and Bloodspore Thrynax really feels like it does that. It's true. We do have Staff of Titania still on the list, which is another source of more readily sacrificed creatures. I still think it's not great in this deck. Also, there's a chance that we're cutting things like Staff of Titania anyway. And yeah, I think the Biophage can go. We were considering cutting him last time, and nothing has really changed about that. He still seems like one of the weaker cards that we have in the deck, so I did like the idea at first because he is doing enough of the things to merit consideration, but I don't think that has stayed true the entire time. Alright, so Branching Evolution is another one of the doubles counters. So it does take advantage of what we're already doing and adds the counters at a much more exponential rate. And I think we're going to cut Benevolent Hydra as another, like, similar to Pier and Winding Constrictor, except focused on the 1/1 counters, and therefore not a detriment if our opponent is running a -1/-1 counters matter deck. But at the same time, it's not where this deck needs to be right now. Like, the extra counter, especially on the Hydra. The Hydra is a minimum... Well, technically it's a minimum 2-drop. We can cast the Hydra on 2 because it's a base 1/1. So the Hydra itself won't enter with counters, but it will make other cards... Other times we put counters on our cards, create extra counters, so... It still doesn't feel like it's worth the effort. Yeah, now I'm just curious if we want to get rid of Hardened Scales itself. Because I think that might be the weakest one still on the list. So if I type in Hardened Scales, it's a single green, so it comes down the cheapest. But it only adds one additional counter. So 3 of the cards I'm keeping double the number of counters. And the Ozolith is itself a source of counters. So all of this is giving me more counter synergies, while like the size of the effect is much larger, is what it comes down to. With only the Ozolith being a smaller effect, but it being a source of counters itself means that it can also increase the number of counters that we're getting. I think I'm going to wind up cutting the Hardened Scales, and I think because of all of these cuts, we can also get rid of the Mindless Automaton now. We cut that. That's 11 cards that we've cut. There is still a chance we will wind up cutting some of the other ones. 2. Like, we don't necessarily need Doubling Season or the other growth card or even the Ozolith. But for the time being, we're going to run them. They're going to stay on the list. Alright. So that was another big chunk of cards that we had to think about. We're still at 142. So we need 82 more cuts. We need something like 2 cuts for every 1 card that is... Well, no, not that bad. We need 1.5 cuts for every card that's staying. That's an awful lot of cards we're losing. Concordant Crossroads is still a potential cut. Like, I want our creatures to have the ability to tap for mana the turn they come into play, and we have a bunch of other cards that allow for that don't grant our opponent's creatures haste. So, yeah, I think maybe Concordant Crossroads can go. It's a bit too dangerous in this deck. I think we have to do like a thing where I pull out the cards of certain subtypes, and I think one of the things I need to pull out is tutors. Because we have an awful lot of them, but I don't think we need every single one that I currently have on the list. So, Survival of the Fittest, Priest of Titania. Priest might go, because we have to commit more elves to the board in order for Priest to be strong. Piper. So far, we do have enough expensive creatures. If we cut like 1 or 2 more of them, though, Piper can actually go. Because we don't have a ton of super expensive creatures. I'm also considering, since we have enough other things to do with the mana, including the creatures getting buffed, and the X spells that I am running, I'm wondering if we can cut the 2 Ulamogs, because we don't actually need them. They're a good thing to have as a way to spend a ton of mana that puts pressure on the board and alleviates any pressure other players were putting on the board at the same time. Going a bit too fast. I do want to consider other cards as we're going through this. Like, Wirewood Channeler probably has a very good chance of going. It's a 4 mana, taps for... It's a 4 mana Priest of Titania that can potentially tap for black, is where we're at. And I don't think we actually need that in this deck. Let's go ahead and cut that one. Symbiote stays, because it's got too many different synergies with some of the other things we have. If we wind up cutting the other things it has good synergy with, then we can consider cutting the Wirewood symbiote. Because at that point, it's only one creature we get to save from a Wrath effect. Unless we know it's coming and can't do anything about it, and we just want to bounce a creature every turn until we get to the player that's going to have the Wrath, like it's sitting on top of their deck, exposed by a card effect, and they just couldn't cast it last turn. We want to mitigate the damage because there's enough other players with enough other things going on that the Wrath is coming anyway. Otherwise, we can save one specific elf we control from a Wrath effect, which still might be worth it. Hello again, Ravika. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me as I continue my Tyvar build. Alright, so yeah, I don't think Wirewood Channeler is where this deck needs to be. So Wirewood Symbiote we're going to keep, even though it's not the best Wrath Protector. It does allow us to tap the creature for mana, bounce one of our comes into play elves, or just bounce an elf to get other triggers, and then so that elf can tap for mana and either double the amount of mana it's tapping for, or allow it to attack in the same turn after getting Tyvar's boost. So, for right now anyway, we're going to keep it. Yeah, I'm still inclined to keep the Patron. Getting to tap everybody for mana and untap them once. Probably good enough. Leveling Season, Primordial Sage. Yeah, we definitely need to look at all of our tutors and see if we need, like, Elvish Harbinger at all. Actually pulling its weight. We don't have the full list, though, right? Like, we got the teaser from Mark Rosewater, unless we got a different legendary horse. There is supposed to be a legendary horse in the set, so I would not count Shadowfax out, just because the card hasn't been spoiled yet. Unless I've missed more of the list, or they confirm Shadowfax is not in the set. But was it a legendary horse? I'm going to assume it's a legendary horse, because there's at least one legendary horse. Oh, Bill the Pony's in? Hmm. That does decrease Shadowfax's ability to be in, but that doesn't negate it unless they specifically said Shadowfax is not in the set somewhere. But yes, Bill the Pony being the legendary horse does create the opportunity for Shadowfax not to be in, but it doesn't immediately preclude it either. Like, Shadowfax can still be in the set just because Bill is the legendary horse that we have. Also, there's a chance that Shadowfax is in one of the commander decks instead, because Mark Rosewater doesn't do spoilers or like teasers for cards in the commander sets. They usually let I think it's Gavany do that instead. I haven't seen the Saruman yet. I only saw like the first 15 or 20 cards that they did. So I've seen like two different Saurons and the pack version of uh Aragorn and let's see, we had like one of the Sams, one of the Frodos. We finally got Boromir's card. Oh yeah, no. The one thing I have does not care for links in chat. Just rescue you from timeout. Sorry about that. Oh, I don't want to make it worse. Okay, let me, because I should untimeout. Where's the untimeout button? There we go. Unban. Found it. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Took me a minute. I knew it was on there somewhere. Yeah, I saw the Witch King and the 9 artworks for the generic ring wraiths, and Eowyn, and yeah, basically whatever was at the beginning of the spoiler things. I saw all of them. I just haven't looked at any of the other ones yet that hadn't been up on the spoiler page before I started streaming again. Are we gonna cut this Omnath? A very high chance we are. I feel like, even though it can hold all of our green mana, like Omnath itself doesn't do much in this deck until we get one of the X spells. So, and we're going to need room, and I just feel like it's gonna go regardless. Tree Speaker can stay for right now, but a lot of the set amount of mana dorks that aren't super cheap. And again, it is a 1-drop. Doesn't make mana until we invest 2 into it, but and yeah, we'll probably cut both the Ulamogs. We have other things to spend all of our mana on, and we don't really need them. So I'm gonna stick with that idea that we don't necessarily need the 2 Ulamogs. Nylea can stay for right now, although it's getting closer to being a cut. Like, we're already getting Death Touch from Tyvar, but only on the elves specifically, and we do have a handful of non-elves that we are definitely running, even if we cut all of the other ones. Esquatch Recruit can stay. Warcraft Judge. Definitely one intervention. We might be able to cut Walking Ballista. It's fine as a way to spend infinite mana, though. But we cut a lot of the 1/1 counters matters things, so it's a little bit worse now. Torment stays. Blackblade stays for now. We might wind up cutting the Blackblade and the staff, though. The what's her name staff, Titania's staff. Incubation Druid. Probably one of the worst mana dorks we still have for how our deck works. And it's still okay. Yeah, I think either the Incubation Druid or the actually the Birds of Paradise might be the worst one, only because it's not an elf and it's not capable of exponential mana growth, and it's not doing anything else for any of our other things. But I think it's close. Like the incubation druid, yeah, it gets counters faster once it gets the first one on it. It's a murderous rider. Bloom. Yeah, Canopy Tactician also might wind up going. It doesn't do enough. Circle of Dreams Druid might go. Yeah, the more I think about, the more I think I want the deck to mostly go tall rather than going wide. And we do run a big risk. We're encouraged to go wide on turns where we cast something like Glimpse of Nature, or when we have the Leaf Crown Mentor, or whatever it's called, the one that lets me pay a green when I cast an elf to draw a card. Leaf Crown Visionary. That's the one. But outside of that, we are actually discouraged by the nature of Commander from going too wide by spending cards to do it. We do still have a bunch of other creatures, though, that let me draw cards when I cast creatures or creatures come into play, or for having a bunch of creatures in play. And if we're going to do that, I want the creatures that tap for a lot of mana. Yeah. Keeping the Ozolith for right now. Tribute for right now. Like, I feel like I can cut the Elvish Archdruid. It's an extra +1/+1 for my elves, and I get green based on the number of elves I have. But that still feels like we already cut the Wirewood Channeler for a similar reason, and I don't think +1/+1 is enough. Yeah, I feel like he and the Tactician can probably go. We'll keep the Leaf Crown because it's letting us draw cards, and I think that's actually better because the deck has fewer things that do that. But them tapping for like a bunch of green mana and getting counters isn't enough. To merit the deck space that they're taking right now, when we already can do way better than that with just Tyvar in play. Yeah, Belor, we have to figure out if I want to cut that or not. Dreadlord, again, might go just because we have too many non-elves still. I don't want him killing all of them. I always appreciate a reprint on Ancient Tomb. 2, 6, 7. 135. Alright, so we clear all, and let's do the tutors next. We have so many. I just want to figure out which ones we can cut at this point. It's Worldly, Empiric, and Natural Order. Awakening, Survival. See, Empath's a tutor. Tooth and Nail's a tutor. Okay, there. For a second there, I thought I cut Fierce Empath instead of copying him. Doctrine, Court of Calling's a tutor. Sage, Summoner's Pact, Harbinger and Primordial Command, or Primal Command rather. Primordial Command. Reflection, Mental, Visionary, Pulse, Renegade Leader, Necrotic Ooze. No, okay. Green Sun Zenith, yes. Lambbolt, Crater Hoof, Soul of the Harvest, Sage, Bow. Oh. Tutor's not quite a tutor until I get infinite mana. Zier, Blade Marwyn, Trophy, Project, Druid, Casualties. Finale is a tutor. It does get the creature with X regardless, so how much mana we actually spent on it. Cronus, Nisa, Left, Tyvar, Sunrise, Jugan, Kagama, Ozolith, Barak, Tribute. Mana Shaman's a tutor. Stick. Sage. Limbellower is in here because it's a tutor. Vian, Leyline, Shared Summons. Ala, Bramble, Force, Witness. Rayleigh. Okay, so this is all of our tutors. Okay, tutors. I say I can't see demonic or worldly. Survival. Tooth and Nail. Cord. Winner's Pact. Harbinger. Zenith. Finale. Shaman. Bellower. And Shared Summons. Yeah, this feels a bit egregious on the tutors thing. Alright. Definitely want to keep demonic. Probably keep natural order. We have enough small creatures that trading it in for one of the best ones in our deck is probably still worth it. Empiric stays. Survival definitely stays. Fierce Empath gets the Kamal's, Sorak and Goreclaw, Crater Hoof Behemoth. What else do we have that's actually a 6-drop? How many 6-drops do we have? Oh. So Kamal's 1. Patrons 2. Primordial Sages 3. Alright, looking better for it now. There's a bunch I've already forgotten. Guys a 5. Can't get Mana Reflection. Woodfall Primus. 4. Crater Hoof, so we're at 5. Soul is 6. Shaman. Zerno. Bonus is only 5. Bloom Ancient, so that's 7. Vorinclex is 8. Five, 6, 7. Yep, we do get the silverback. Cradle Clear Cutter can be tutored for. We're up to 10 now. Sorak and Goreclaw is 11. Soul of New Phyrexia. Woodland Bellower if he stays. Though he probably isn't at this point. But we're up to 13 now. Sovereign. Red Lord, no. Other Kamal. 14. Bane is 15. Ibix is 16. Chieftain is 17. Oh, he's 5. And the Earthshaker Giant, so... Yeah, we have 18 creatures that thing tutors for right now, so Fierce Empath can almost definitely stay. Tooth and Nail double tutors and then lets us bypass the casting cost on them for 9 mana. That's probably way too good in a deck that can easily generate that much. Board is instant speed and into play. Maybe it's Summoner's Pact. We do have combo potential, but our combo potential usually involves infinite mana, so the 0 casting cost on Summoner's Pact is probably not necessary. Probably don't need the versatility on Primal Command, since tutoring is going to be the main thing we do with it. Being able to put a non-creature permanent onto its owner's deck and shuffle is not as big a deal. You can probably cut the Green Suns too. All of our creatures are green, I think, at this point, except for Necrotic Ooze. So that's still basically tutoring every creature in our deck, but can probably do better than paying its mana cost +1 to get it. Like, compared to all of our other tutors. Finale stays because it is itself a backup Craterhoof Behemoth, even if we don't get specifically Craterhoof or one of the other overrun creatures. Fauna Shaman stays because it's another oh god, Survival of the Fittest. I keep picturing the like Mog standing over the other Mog, and I'm like, I cannot remember this card's name all of a sudden. Woodland Bellower. Yeah, I think we're at the point Woodland Bellower can go. It does tutor for Fierce Empath, which is really nice, because then the Empath tutors for everything else, and the Empath can tutor for this one, but I think we have too many tutors in the deck to begin with. And I think we want to cut down on some of them. I think shared summons can go. I think that might be the worst one left in the deck. With the only benefit being that it's a 2-for-1 at instant speed, and it gets you 2 creatures. But I think we can do better as far as our tutors are concerned. Maybe Court of Calling also. It does get it to play, so we're spending 3 extra mana. But we're spending 3 extra mana already kind of shot down Green Sun Zenith. I'm not sure that the instant speed on Court of Calling matters. Like, there's no creature we're going to tutor into play that's going to have that dramatic an impact on not our turn. Like, obviously, tutoring in Craterhoof Behemoth or something, like, mid-combat, when bad blocks have been declared, is cool, but that's, like, the only thing we're really doing with it. Like, that and the Earthshaker and whatnot. Yeah, I think Court of Calling can go. There's no creature that we tutor in and we really get the opponent most of the time. Like, oh, I'm going to attack you with a bunch of things. Well, here's Elish Norn, so now all your guys are tiny or dead, and all of my guys are huge and just eat your creatures. Like, we don't have anything anywhere close to that caliber of, oh, by the way, surprise, here's a terrible thing for you. I feel like. So, we cut all of those. We lose Cord. Shared summons. Woodland Bellower. He is. Sons. Primal. And Summoner's Pact. Oh, it's right there. Also, we didn't cut Harbinger, but I kind of feel like we can cut Harbinger at this point. Like, I think we have enough other things that tutor, and it only taps for 1 mana. But did I not have Harbinger down here, or did I just... Oh, there it is, and I just missed it. Just glossed over it for the other cards around it. Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? Yep, okay. So that brings us down to 128. Well, we're almost at the point where we only have to cut half of the remaining deck and we'll be good. Alright, clear all those off. Yeah, I think we're going to wind up cutting Birds of Paradise, sadly. Like, on the one hand, it's an evasive creature, but on the other hand, we have a lot of things that give Trample and Death Touch, and I think that's enough evasion for the deck to actually function properly. So... And it only grows by 1... Like, there might even be an argument for cutting, like, the basic things like Lawnmower Elves, but at least they are elves for the other cards that care about that. In addition to being, like, cheap mana dorks that can interact with a lot of our cards. They go really well with Glimpse of Nature and the ability to tap for mana, like, with haste. Like, Cloudstone Curio just gets very out of hand at that point. So we currently have enough large things for Elvish Piper because we had enough things that what's its name can tutor for, and then we had a few other creatures in like the 5 mana range. So put them into play for 1 mana gives us more options in the turn. Where are we at right now? We're at the hour mark. Okay, I think that's going to do it for me for this stream then. We cleared out a bunch of cards. We'll knock the Birds of Paradise off real quick. Drop it down to 127. But yeah, I did the one stream earlier and then we had to pause. And I came back and did the second one, and I think that's going to do it for me for today. Thank you again to Ravika for stopping by. I always appreciate it whenever anybody comes by to stop and talk to me. And I do hope Shadowfax is in the set, both because Shadowfax is a cool horse and because apparently it will make Ravika that much happier. And I will see you all next time. Have a good rest of your day.